Good evening, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I am the director of the Ashland Public Library, and I'm really thrilled to be here with George Kirby, and we're going to be learning all about electrical vehicles tonight, EVs for short. And before we get started, I just want to say a few things. One is I'd like to thank the Ashland Sustainability Committee and Green Up Ashland for partnering with us on this program, and the Friends of the Ashland Public Library who support all of our adult programming. Well, they actually support all of our programming, so it's not just for adults. So obviously we have George Kirby here. He is the Newton's EV Task Force Technical Advisor, and he's going to be talking about higher efficiency, lower cost of driving electric, and his own experience with driving electrical vehicles. And I know it's not electrical, but that's the word that sticks in my head. So welcome, George. Please tell us all about yourself and your experience with electric vehicles and what we should know as we think about getting ones for ourselves.
Thank you, Mina. I am thrilled to be here, and I'm very excited to be speaking with everybody about electric vehicles and our very immediate future, coming faster than anybody expected, or most people expected for sure. I am fortunate to have an electric vehicle myself. I've been driving a Nissan Leaf for the last 9 years. I love it. I wouldn't go back. So I'm going to tell you the story about how I got here and where we all go from here and what we can do, and tell you a few more stories about pollution and a little bit about the impacts of what we can do against climate change and some of your choices on EVs. But let me begin by telling you that I've been a Newton resident for the last 30 years or so, and I have recently retired from my engineering career, and I've been drafted into the Newton Electric Vehicle Task Force. So with a technical background, I've been able to help out on a number of efforts that are now moving forward in Newton. So without any further ado, let me see if I can share my screen, and we'll take it from there. We'll go right into the presentation. Be happy to answer questions, which you can put into the question chat room, or you can ask it yourself at the end, and we'll make time for those. So hang on to your hats. This is a picture from the parking lot at the company I worked for in Boston for many years, and of the electric vehicles and chargers we have installed, with Boston in the background. So here we go. This is an outline of what we're going to do. I grew up in New York City, and that shaped a lot of where I am now. So why should we be driving electric? Understanding a bit about the efficiencies of electric vehicles versus internal combustion engine vehicles. What are some of the costs that you'll be dealing with from driving electric in comparison? What sort of EV charging alternatives do you have at home or at work or when traveling? And some new technology developments in all the electric vehicles available in the States this coming year, of which there are some 30 by my count, not counting all of the different flavors of each vehicle and some of the tax credits and rebates you should have access to. So moving forward, again, Mina, if there are things we need to address as we go, please let me know by all means.
Will do.
Great. Okay, so I also love to ride a bicycle, both for recreation and commuting. So let me say at the outset that bicycling is more healthy than just sitting in a car and driving. And on a beautiful day, it can't be beat. I certainly recommend it. And if you can get somewhere safely by bicycle, by all means do it. I know there are occasions when it's important to have your transportation with a roof over your head and maybe a bit of heat or air conditioning and carrying lots of groceries. So when you need to drive a vehicle, by all means, make it make it a non-polluting and nicer one, like an electric vehicle. But don't give up your bicycling. It makes a lot more sense than dragging around a 2,000-pound car, 2,000 pounds worth of steel with you with one person in it. By all means, take your bicycle instead if you can. And don't throw out your car that you have now just to get an electric vehicle, because you might be causing more impact to resources by dumping your car before it's time. But when you're ready to make the switch to a new car, by all means, get an electric vehicle. This is a picture of myself charging up the Leaf shortly after we put the chargers in the company. Moving forward here, I grew up in New York City, and I took the subways and buses to high school in Manhattan, a little over an hour commute each way. And when I was in high school, shortly after this, a bit before that, this image from National Geographic was highlighted for the year 1981, you can see some of the pollution levels with the key at the top right being unhealthy in the eastern part of the country and elsewhere. And due to the Clean Air Act, things have gotten much better. So by 2016, it looked quite a bit better on the right. Since we've had catalytic converters in cars, it's helped quite a bit, and pollution controls at power plants. But suffice it to say that when I got home after a day at school, I'm sorry if this is a little bit too graphic, but you could blow your nose after a day in Manhattan, it would come out black. So it's to that level. All the particulates coming out of the exhaust were awful, not to mention the sulfur dioxide, all the other chemicals, nitrogen oxide, that were in the pollution. So a lot of them had gotten cleaned up. The situation is much better. In the rest of the world, it's not necessarily much better. Plus, we've learned that carbon is the form of pollution that is leading us to climate change, which is also very bad. And just by burning things, fuels in your car, you're going to be emitting it. There is no way around it. So we have to move forward. But this shaped my experience and desire to go to electric vehicles when they were available. So why should we drive electric? Well, this is a advertising graphic depicting how aggressive your car driving can be, but it really depicts something else. It depicts that underneath the hood of every internal combustion engine vehicle you can drive today, there's a campfire burning. We're burning a campfire to get around. So as a matter of fact, you might want to consider us cavemen in cars. That's about where we are today, driving around. And we need to make a change. And it's been too long since we've had this situation going on, since near the beginning of personal transportation, automobiles, over 100 years ago. So I'm going to switch to a video that's going to have some animation that will graphically drive home some of these points about why we should be driving electric. I think it's important to understand some of the implications, because a number of questions have been raised about whether driving electric vehicles is really better for the environment and better for our health. And I think we need to address those. And let us do this quickly, and then we will move on. Can everybody see the video screen now? Hopefully, Mina.
We can see it. I think you just have to click on play.
Here we go.
So the argument goes, electric vehicles don't pollute, but the electricity powering the electric vehicles does pollute. Some even say it pollutes even more than a gasoline or petrol burning car. If we're going to look beyond the EV itself to the energy that powers it, shouldn't we do the same for the fossil-fueled combustion car? So what goes into producing the fuel that you burn in your car every day? Gasoline or petrol starts as oil, on average 5,900 feet below the surface of the earth. A great deal of oil is extracted using what is called a pump jack. Pump jacks don't run by themselves. In most cases, they use electricity. It takes, on average, 9,960 kilowatt hours of electricity every month to drive one pump jack. To put that in context, that is enough electricity to power a Tesla Model 3 for 34,860 miles. In the United States, there are an estimated 435,000 oil wells using pump jacks. Estimated electricity use for these wells is over 4,300 gigawatt hours a month. That is a lot of electricity, and that is just to get the oil out of the ground. If we use that electricity to power electric vehicles directly, it would be enough to power over 15 million electric vehicles for a month. That's just US oil wells on land. What about deep sea drilling? The most common way of powering an offshore oil rig is with a diesel generator. An average oil rig generator uses 20 to 30 metric tons of diesel per day. The electrical equivalent to this is 300,000 kilowatt hours. There are an estimated 1,470 offshore oil rigs in the world using over 1.3 billion kilowatt hours of energy a month. All this oil pumping combined would be enough to power 19.5 million electric vehicles per month. This is just from the energy used to pump the oil out of the ground in the US and offshore. So not only does the fuel pollute when we burn it in our cars, we are also using a huge amount of electricity just to pump the oil that makes the fuel. Combining the pollution from the tailpipe emissions with the emissions generated to pump the oil out of the ground is not a pretty picture. And pumping oil is not clean. Millions of gallons are spilled into the ocean every year, causing havoc for fish and other wildlife. Then that oil needs to be transported. Most of the oil is pumped through pipelines. There are over 337,000 miles of pipeline in the world, carrying most of the 100 million barrels a day we consume. These pipelines use pump stations that use even more energy. Oil is also shipped. The oceans are unregulated as regards emissions, so ships use the cheapest, dirtiest fuel possible to keep costs down, making them one of the largest pollution sources on the planet. Shipping is responsible for an estimated 1 billion tons of CO2 per year, and 10% of that is shipping oil. Because these tanker ships pollute so much, many countries do not allow them to operate near their coastline, so they have to be towed into port where the oil is transferred to a refinery. Refining oil takes a huge amount of energy and generates even more pollution. Refining is done by heating oil up to 800 degrees Fahrenheit or 420 degrees centigrade. Heating 100 million barrels of oil a day to these temperatures requires an enormous amount of energy. Heating this oil generates so much pollution, refineries create a serious health hazard anywhere they operate. Refineries are the #1 pollution source in many major cities around the world. It is so bad that people living near these refineries have a marked increase of lung disease. Once the oil has been refined, it is transported to fuel stations in diesel trucks, creating even more pollution. Then this fuel is burned in cars and trucks right in our cities where we live and breathe. These cars and trucks have internal combustion engines that are extremely inefficient. 70% of the energy from burning fossil fuels is wasted as heat, while only 30% goes to turn your wheels. So after we use all that electricity pumping oil out of the ground, refining it, transporting it, we then waste 70% when we burn it. Fossil fuel production is an incredibly dirty, inefficient process from start to finish. When we contrast all this to powering an electric vehicle, the difference is very stark. Electricity does not need to be pumped from thousands of feet underground. transported with trucks or trains, or pumped along pipelines. It does not need to be shipped overseas. It does not need to be refined, and it is not polluting where we live and breathe. Even if electricity is produced from burning coal, the power plant is far away from population centres, transferred over power lines, keeping any direct pollution away from the population. And if the EV is powered with clean energy, it is clean from start to finish. In the United States, 47% of electricity comes from sources that emit no CO2. In Europe, it is even better at 56%. And the percentage of clean energy is growing every year as coal and gas plants are being replaced by renewable energy sources. So what about the lithium used in EV batteries? Lithium is a metal that is mined in the deserts of Australia, China, Argentina and Chile. Besides being a key ingredient in batteries, lithium is also ingested as a medicine for bipolar disorder. Much has been made about the environmental impact of lithium mining, but this is all a little bit overblown. Australia is the largest producer of lithium in the world. If there were any major environmental problems with this mining, some Australians would be talking about it. But what is Australia really talking about when it comes to pollution? Oil refining. Yes, oil refining is creating a much bigger environmental risk than all the lithium mining going on anywhere in the country. Australia is not a very densely populated country. They consume 1% of the world's oil supply and only refine 1/4 of the oil they consume. But they mine 50% of the world's lithium. So a country that only refines 1/4 of 1% of the world's oil and mines 50% of the world's lithium, the biggest contributor to pollution and risk to human health in Australia is oil refineries. That does not even take into consideration the drilling, pumping, transporting and burning of this oil. This is just refining it. The more you look into it, the argument that battery production is somehow as bad as the cycle of fossil fuels is ridiculous. All the lithium mining in the world to date has not done anything like as much damage to the environment as just one major oil spill. So, what about the batteries? What happens to EV batteries when they get old and are discarded? When no longer practical in an electric vehicle, the batteries can be used as energy storage to power a home or business, giving them a second life. And when they're no longer any good for this, they are recycled, broken down to recover the valuable metals in these batteries to be used in the next generation of electric vehicles. It looks a bit silly to use so much electricity to pump oil out of the ground, create tons of pollution transporting and refining it, to finally waste 70% of it burning it in our cars when we could simply use that electricity directly to power electric vehicles, eliminating the pollution from refining and burning oil in inefficient internal combustion engines. It is obvious when you look at the big picture. Oil production is a dirty, wasteful process, especially when compared to the alternative powering EVs with renewable electricity.
Look at that. That doesn't look too good. Now it looks a little better. I think I'm going to try this one out. Okay, yeah. Oh, nice inside. Wow. Oh, sorry. Wow, this thing's fast. See ya.
What can you do?
Okay, that's where we come back to our presentation and what can we do? So that was an impressive set of graphics, and here we go. All right, hopefully we're back in business here. Mina, can you see the presentation?
Yep, we're back.
Great. Okay. So, hearkening back to the development of automobiles, it turns out that Thomas Edison collaborated with Henry Ford for a number of years, and on electric automobiles. And there were a number of electric car companies at the time. Detroit Electric was a big one. And internal combustion cars didn't really take off until they incorporated electric motors as the starters for them. Before that, you had to hand crank it. And it was a dirty, strenuous business to do that. So actually, Henry Ford, shown on the left here, started producing the Model T, which was one of the first most popular cars. But his wife, Clara Ford, continued to drive a Detroit Electric, I think, for another 15 years. Did not want to switch to the dirty internal combustion vehicles, the Model T. So there is a worldwide transition underway away from internal combustion engines. So there are EU regulations for 2030 that are pushing the manufacturers all over the world to transition to cleaner vehicles, being electric cars is one example. And these are the plans, the announced plans of most of the major automakers to do a conversion, some percentage by 2025, more by 2030, and some of the automakers all electric, producing all electric vehicles only by 2030. Even Ford and GM moving considerably in that direction. I heard today that Canada is now requiring only electric vehicles to be sold by 2035 as well. So the major companies are recognizing this is an important transition. This is a statement from the GM chair and CEO. And they would be, I'm sure, happy to sell you electric vehicles just as much as they would be to sell you any other vehicle. So they're still going forward. And since the regulations are driving it, everybody will be on a level playing field. So they're happy to do it. So now that we know that electric vehicles are better for the environment than internal combustion, the question is, for you as a driver, what are the advantages for you? So I summarized a few of them in a slide here. And you can get an idea that they are really wonderful to drive compared to a normal car. The acceleration is tremendous, even on not a sports car electric vehicle. Even in my 2013 Nissan Leaf, I like the acceleration a lot better than any other normal car I have driven. They're clean, as we said, they're smooth. There's something called one pedal driving, meaning that you don't have to go back and forth between the accelerator and the brake. You simply can lift your foot off the accelerator and the energy gets regenerated back into the battery, and you slow down from that. You don't actually use your brakes in anything like the way you would in a normal internal combustion vehicle. As a matter of fact, I didn't have to change my original brake pads for, till last year, that was 8 years on the original pads, because you're only using them for the final stop, not for the slowing down typically. There's a low center of gravity because the purpose-designed electric vehicles incorporate the heavy batteries underneath the vehicle. So the cornering is excellent. There is low maintenance because there are no gears. There's just a direct drive gear train, but there's no transmission to change gears. There's no oil to change because the engine there is no engine. It's only an electric motor. They're quiet. They're absolutely wonderful. I recommend them. If you haven't test driven one, by all means, go sign up for a test drive. So if you want to understand why things look so drastically different between internal combustion and electric vehicles, there are various estimates. In the video, they talked about maybe of the input energy going into the vehicle in the form of gasoline for internal combustion. There are a lot of losses relating to friction and heat and various other things, leaving only some, you're losing quite a bit, leaving only maybe 20-25% of the energy left actually for motion, or in other words, losing 75 to 80% of the energy in all that oil you're burning. Not a pretty picture. And let's look at electric vehicles by contrast. If you put 100 watts of electricity into the vehicle, 100 watts of electricity to the car, you're losing 5% in the transmission of the electricity in terms of the battery efficiency. charging and discharging in the car itself, you're losing another bit. And you're ending up with 80% of the power that you're taking in actually driving the vehicle, compared to, what did we say, 20-25% in the internal combustion. There is another type of electric vehicle called the hydrogen fuel cell, which takes in hydrogen, uses that in a solid state fashion to create electricity and drives the electric motor in the car. But there's some gotchas there. There's actually, hydrogen is not something you dig out of the ground. It's something you have to create by reforming other fuels, and you're going to lose a significant portion of your energy there. In the compression and transportation of it, you lose more. In the fuel cell conversion in the car, it's not all that efficient. And you're left with half the amount of power, more or less, roughly, to drive the vehicle, or in other words, 62% loss. If you would take that same electricity you would have used to generate the hydrogen in the first place, you can go nearly twice as far in the electric vehicle if you just put it into the battery. So they are dramatically less efficient than a battery electric vehicle. So I would go with a battery electric vehicle myself, and I'm happy with it. Why is all this? It's because the electric vehicle itself has a low loss drivetrain. You don't have all the frictional losses you do in all the moving parts of a normal internal combustion engine. The conversion efficiency is very high compared to even the fuel cell. When you slow down, you're not dumping all that energy as heat in your normal brakes. You're actually regenerating electricity and putting it back into the battery. I'll never forget, a friend at work had said, "You mean we take all that oil and we burn it to make the car go, and then when we want to stop, we step on the brakes and throw the energy away? What are we thinking?" And that's exactly it. Also, when your electric vehicle is stopped in traffic, you're not losing power because the engine is not continuing to idle. And of course, you can start from renewable electricity and be much cleaner than generating electricity, and more efficient. So I want to illustrate the cost of what it takes to drive an electric car by my own car. So I have a lifetime fuel efficiency average on that display for my 2013 old electric vehicle of 4.4 miles for every kilowatt hour of electricity. So what does that translate to? Let's see. If I buy my electricity from the renewable supplier here in Newton, there's a certain number of cents per kilowatt hour, but there's an additional charge for delivery. Your electric bill is in two parts. It's the actual cost of generation and the cost of delivery. And if you add those two together, it's not 12 cents a kilowatt hour. For my renewable bill, it's more like 19 cents a kilowatt hour. Still not too bad. So if you do the math, that means that for every mile, that electricity is costing me over 4 cents. And if the efficiency in my car were not this good, because I'm a conservative driver, I don't step hard on the accelerator pedal. So maybe it would be 5 cents a mile or something like that instead of 4 cents a mile. But if you compare that to the cost of your gasoline for driving your internal combustion vehicle, say you got 30 miles per gallon, and say you were paying $3.50 a gallon. I actually did this slide a while ago. I think you're paying a bit more than that now. But at $3.50 a gallon, you'd be spending almost 12 cents a mile. So would you rather spend 4 or 5 cents a mile on an electric car? Or would you rather spend 12 cents a mile to buy your gasoline? So the savings add up from operation of the vehicle over several years pretty quickly. And the different automakers on their websites, on their sales sheets, will give you a calculator to estimate how much you're going to save per year, depending on how many miles you drive. And that's including my cost of electricity, which is for renewable higher than other electricity costs if you don't opt for the renewable. That's just an example. That's not the most efficient electric vehicle out there. It's what I could access some 9 years ago. So let's look at the type of charging that would be available to you for your electric car. The first one is called level 1 charging. It's where you plug the car into your 110 volt outlet at home, 110 volt, 10 amp outlet. You plug it in to the wall socket, and the other end where it plugs into the car has a standard charging port called a J1772. It's standard throughout the world, but the European ones have a little bit different shape. And with your car plugged in at home, it will give you roughly 5 miles of range for every hour of charge, hour of plug-in time. So depending on how far you drive, typically every day, you can add a certain number of miles. If you plugged in overnight, say for 8 hours, you can get 40 miles out of your home outlet. Maybe that's enough for you, maybe not. In that case, you might want to install what are called level 2 chargers, which operate from 200 and 220, 240 volts. AC, if you can get that wired into your garage, or use one of the commercial charging stations located around your town or around your city or around the country. I'll show you how to access those in a moment. But with a standard 6 kilowatt level, you will get approximately 25 miles of range for your car for every hour of plug-in. So when I plugged in my car at work, and by 4 hours of charge, I could have gotten, if my car would have gone that far 9 years ago, it didn't, 100 miles of range, which is pretty decent. It was ready by lunchtime. And then lastly, along highways, you might find DC fast charging, 480 volts DC. And depending on the capability of your car and the capability of the charger, you will get quite a bit of miles in 20 minutes to half an hour, over 70. And I think the newer chargers are quite a bit faster, and the newer vehicles are even faster than that. You can probably easily add over 100 miles in half an hour. And those ports are not as standardized. My vehicle used the CHAdeMO port, which was the original Japanese standard, that has been replaced internationally by the CCS combo ports, which include the standard charge port J1772 and 2 additional pins, which you can plug in if you're at one of these fast chargers. Comes in one big handle that'll put in the DC. And everybody except for Tesla in the US is using those. And the Tesla has a charging port. When they had to develop one to accommodate all the things they wanted, there was no other choice available. But Tesla now in Europe is using the CCS combo as well. So you can get on a road trip, if you drive for a couple of hours and then stop to get a cup of coffee and use the facilities, you can add inside of half an hour, you can add another 100 miles or quite a bit more for the new fast chargers, perhaps 150 miles. So it's reasonable to take a road trip as well, but the normal usage case is you're driving during the day and plugging it in at night, or plugging it in at your place of business while it's sitting there and you're at work. So asking the question, how long would it take to charge your car, is not really the right way to frame the questions. That is predicated on driving to a gas station and putting gas in your car. And how long does it take? Well, it takes me more than 5 minutes. It's too long. But that's not how you would use your electric car. You would use it by plugging in more like your phone at night. So the question is how long it would take. The answer would be no time at all, because you get there, you plug it in, you forget about it. And it's done by midday at work, or it's done by the morning at home. So it takes no time at all in that sense. It's a different use case than your internal combustion car. There's some more excitement here because not only can your plug in your home power your car, but your car can also power your home, let's say in a power failure or other use case. Let's explore that a little bit. My car had this capability 9 years ago, but the chargers were never released. They are being released this year, 2022. And this is a sheet from Ford, their new F-150 Lightning electric pickup truck. It's going to have what they call intelligent backup power, which is a version of vehicle to home or vehicle to grid. Their charging station will enable you, in case of a power failure, to take power out of the truck and put it to your home. Of course, you need to disconnect from the grid with the transfer switch automatic, like you would if you had a generator. But instead of generating the power, the car will supply it back to your home, up to something like 3 days of powering your typical home, or longer, maybe up to 10 days if you just ration how you use it. And not only Ford has this capability, but the new standards have been released for the CCS combo connector. So other manufacturers have also made it possible. Besides Ford, VW has made it possible. Hyundai and Kia and GM is all in the process of testing this, initially to back power your home if needed, and eventually to be able to support the electrical grid through periods of peak demand, especially important in the summertime when all the air conditioning is causing problems for the electrical supply. So this is very exciting, and it's already in place, and you can buy the chargers this year. Ford is the first ones offering it direct from a manufacturer with an integrated package, but you can do the chargers separately and integrate it yourself. So let's talk about what cars are available to you. This is a bit of an eye chart, but I would encourage you to go to the Inside EV's website, which contains some of these comparisons. This is a chart of all the electric vehicles available today or this year in the US in terms of how far they drive on a single charge. It ranges from a low of about 100 miles on a charge to a high of about 500 miles on a charge if you're willing to spend that much money. So the prices vary dramatically as well. But there are a lot of different styles of vehicles. And here's another chart sorted instead by the price increasing and showing how far each of them goes. So you can spend before, including the federal tax credit, but before the Massachusetts rebate, you can spend as little as $20,000 on a new car. You can get a new version of my Nissan Leaf for that goes twice as far for less money than I initially paid for it 9 years ago. So that's $20,000 minus another $2,500 mass rebate, assuming you can take advantage of the tax credit. So for some $18,000, you can have a new electric car that will go 150 miles on a charge, and then you can fast charge it if you need to, or just plug it in again and charge up. Of course, if you'd rather spend on a Porsche, you can, spend 180,000 right there, and there you go. You have a lot of options. So I'll show the link at the end for the Inside EV's website. It's very helpful. I know it's a little bit hard to read this chart, especially if you're looking at it on a phone. So let's talk about what choices you have in electric vehicles. Well, here's the first page that I assembled. These are mainly sedan type vehicles, but with some mini SUVs as well. You have the Nissan Leaf, which went on the market at the end of 2010, the very, very end. And I have a 2013 model, still very happy with it. There are some newer ones, the Chevy GM Bolt and the larger version of the Bolt called the EUV, the same car with a larger body. There's the new Volkswagen ID.4, the first of their lines of electric ID cars to be marketed here. There are a couple from Volvo and its daughter brand Polestar. You have a couple of Teslas there, the smaller ones, the Model 3 and the slightly larger Model Y. There's a brand new Subaru Solterra, which is the same as the new Toyota coming out this year, a mini SUV. There's the small cars, there's the Mini E. It's a little hard to come by. They didn't realize demand for all of these would be so high. The Jaguar has one of them as well for the past couple of years. Mazda released a new one, but it doesn't go very far, so I don't think it's all that popular. Hyundai has an electric version of their Ioniq that will do 170 miles. They also have a newer Kona EV which I think does more like 250 miles on a charge. Kia has another example of that same car with a different body called the e-Niro. Audi has a couple of flavors of what they call the e-tron. All of them are very capable cars and will certainly do you well for around town driving. And if you're willing to stop at a fast charger on the highway, it'll do well there too for you. Let's look at some of the newer and larger cars here. Let's see, Nissan is releasing a new model, also a kind of mini SUV called the Ariya later this year. Tesla has larger cars, the Model S and Model X. And Ford has the Mustang Mach-E, which is not really a Mustang, it's an all-new electric car. That's been very popular. Kia and Hyundai are releasing new models, one called the EV6, the other Ioniq 5, based on a new electric vehicle architecture that charges even faster than most of the others on the market. The first new GM electric vehicle architecture car is called the Cadillac Lyriq. Maybe it's the second car, but the second vehicle with that system, but it's the first more like a car thing. BMW has two new models. One is called the i4 and the other is more of an SUV called the iX. Porsche has the electric Taycan. Again, that's the $150,000, $180,000 model. If you only want to spend $100,000, $150,000, you can get the new Lucid Air that'll go, I think, close to 500 miles on the charge, if that's important to you and you really like the beautiful car. You can also get the new Mercedes EQS, their flagship electric vehicle, and they're, remember, changing over to all electric vehicles in the next few years. And now we have pickups and serious SUVs available. GMC has the Hummer, which they've now made into an electric vehicle. It doesn't get as good an efficiency as any of the others because it's a giant, heavy vehicle, but if that's what you need, I guess. And Rivian is a new manufacturer making both a pickup version and a SUV version of their R1. Deliveries started the end of last year, and Ford shortly this spring is about to start delivering their new electric F-150. Demand is so strong they had to double their production and then double it again to try and meet it, and they are releasing it with an available bi-directional vehicle to home power station, as well as the first manufacturer to bundle that. So you have some, 30 choices here on electric vehicles available this year of all sizes and models and all shapes, and the whole range of prices, ranging from, after the rebates and tax credits, some $18,000 up to some, $180,000, a factor of 10 there, however much you'd like to spend. So the question is, what would it cost you and what can you do about it? And then we'll get to questions. First of all, there is a federal tax credit. If you can take advantage of it, it would reduce your tax liability. If you have a battery capacity sufficiently, you can get the full $7,500 tax credit, and any purely electric vehicle, as opposed to a plug-in hybrid, will get you this tax credit. If you would rather lease the vehicle, then you don't have to worry about getting the credit, and the dealer will pass along, hopefully, some or all of those savings that they get from the credit onto your lease. And not all the manufacturers still have this credit available, because once they sell 200,000 plug-in vehicles, the tax credit phases out. So Tesla no longer has a tax credit available, and GM no longer has it, but many of the other ones still do. Now there's the Massachusetts rebate. If you are a resident living here, if your vehicle you purchase is under $50,000, you can get a $2,500 rebate for a battery electric vehicle or a fuel cell electric vehicle, of which there are a few, but again, the efficiency is not as high. Or for a plug-in hybrid, $1,500, and you have to keep it registered here for 36 months. Then what about a charging station? Say you'd like to equip your home with one of those 240 volt charging stations. The charging stations start at about $300. You can plug it in or have it installed yourself, and they go up to about $600-700, depending on the level of automation and software control and power you would like. For business programs for installation at workplaces, there is a Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection electric vehicle program that would cover 60% of the hardware and installation costs. Alternatively, Eversource and National Grid have programs covering the electrical infrastructure cost for a business installation or a major residential installation of apartment buildings. And a portion of the charging hardware cost, but you would need to cover the charging hardware installation itself. And that goes for level 2 and level 3 DC fast charging stations. And currently a separate electrical circuit is required with a separate metering, but I believe that's going to be changed to not require direct from the utility, but being able to supply it from the facility as well. In terms of home use for residential, if you're an Eversource customer, you can get $300 back for installing and registering one of these software charging stations that start at around $500. You can get $300 back. That would has the caveat that if Eversource is experiencing peak demand and needs to turn down your station current there, they can do that and throttle the power to it. And now for some of the links, here's an image showing you links to the tax credits and the rebates available. There are links to some of the charging stations. The network I recommend you look at is called PlugShare. It'll show you locations and comments from users about all the chargers of any manufacturer. It's available as an app for your phone or as a web page, either way. One of the major charging station suppliers in our area here in Massachusetts is called ChargePoint, and you can log on to their app or web page as well, but it will only show you the ChargePoint charges, whereas PlugShare is user-supplied data and covers all the charges of any type, and the fast chargers and the medium and the slow chargers and of any brand. And there's a link to incentives for the charging stations. For the electric vehicle news online, I found Inside EVs to be very helpful, and both sales items there as well as technical background. And for environmental benefits, if you'd like to follow up on some of those figures that I presented from the graphs or the animation, the Union of Concerned Scientists has a number of resources available both on the cars and the truck pollution. And that brings us through the official portion of the presentation. And let's go back to Zoom here. And I'm going to stop sharing. And then I think, we can take the questions if you'd like to field those.
Sure. Okay, so your thing's back on. I'm going to add myself so I'm going to ask you questions. So everybody, you can add questions to the chat, or you can raise your hand and you can unmute yourself to ask a question directly to George. I'm going to ask the first one, George. What was your first electric vehicle?
What was my first vehicle in general?
No, your first electric one.
My first electric one is the one I bought I leased initially and then bought out the lease 9 years ago, which is my Nissan Leaf from 2013. Still very happy with it. I wish it went further on a charge, but I'm going to hold out a little longer. I don't want to ditch the car while it's still performing well around town. And if I need to, I'll go to a fast charge station on the highway. I should mention that in general, you don't want to use these vehicles just going to fast charge stations, because too much of that too often will degrade your battery more quickly. So better to charge at home, better to charge at level 2 stations in general.
Vanita says, will you share this presentation or the recording? I will share the recording link tomorrow, and all the links, all the resources that George shared especially in the last slide that he had. And of course, the video link. Terry says, what is your impression of the used EV market?
Oh, yeah. Well, used cars in general are very high cost right now. And EVs are less available because they're very desirable for a lot of reasons. So the resale value is high, the costs are high. And considering the rebates and tax credits are available on new vehicles, it may be to your advantage if you can get one. To get a new vehicle, I think you need to balance that carefully. And the newer vehicles, of course, go further in a charge than the older ones. But you'll see what you can do. The batteries generally last the life of the vehicle, but they degrade in capability over time. My battery in my vehicle has lost approximately, I don't know, maybe 15% of its capability over the 9 years, maybe 20%, something like that. It's pretty typical. Depends again how often you fast charge it or not. Another concern while we're on battery degradation in older vehicles is that the rated range of the vehicle depends on how fast you drive. If you drive faster, of course, you have more air resistance. So if I'm driving at high speed on the highway, I might get 20% less range off the top than if I'm driving at city speeds, whereas it's kind of the opposite of an internal combustion, which are less efficient at city speeds because of stopping and the starting. They're throwing away the energy every time they brake. Electric vehicle, you recoup that energy and you don't have the air drag at high speeds, so you're more efficient on the city streets. But 20% off the top, say for driving at high speed on a highway. Let's say it's very warm outside and you need to run the air conditioning. Well, maybe there's another 20% off the top on your mileage because you're powering the air conditioning or the heating in the dead of winter. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, let's go on.
Okay. Thomas asks, what are your thoughts on hybrid EV gas versus all EV?
Well, a hybrid plug-in EV combo gas car. A hybrid without plug-in is just a gas car that gets better fuel mileage. Still not great. Maybe it'll get, 40 miles per gallon, maybe a little more, 45 maybe. Mm-hmm. My electric vehicle in equivalent mileage from 9 years ago gets 105 miles per gallon equivalent. 105 miles per gallon, that's twice as good as the best conventional hybrid vehicle 9 years ago, and they're better now. But a plug-in hybrid can run on electricity for as far as the small battery will carry you. Normally that's some cars 15 miles, some other cars might be 25 miles. I think the best one is one of the Toyotas might take you 35, 40 miles on electricity before the gas engine kicks in. Is that enough for you to drive on electricity all the time until you take it out on the highway? I don't know how far you drive every day. Also keep in mind that if you step on it, the gas engine will kick in to provide the extra power. Whereas in a purely electric vehicle, the electric motor is sized to give you all the power you need. And I'm not kidding about zoom, zoom. Even in the least expensive electric vehicle, it will be more pickup than you had imagined available to you because of that high torque at low speeds compared to internal combustion engine. It's wonderful. I encourage you to take a test drive.
Mm-hmm. Thomas also asks, what are your thoughts on leasing versus buying, given how fast technology is changing?
That's a very, very good question, given the ranges are going up every year and given that the battery costs are dropping every year. It also depends on whether you're prepared over the course of a few years to pay for, half the cost of the vehicle in a lease. It's something to think about. I don't know the answer to that. A couple of years ago, I would say start by leasing. Now that the cars will go typically 250 miles for the least expensive ones, aside from the really lower end ones, most of them are going 250 miles. If that's generally enough for you, it should take you over the course of at least a couple of days before you plug in, and you can plug in every evening. Mm-hmm. And you can fast charge on the highway. Look at the PlugShare app. You'll see the fast chargers proliferating in more and more spots. So I don't know that you need to lease it anymore. because the technology is already good enough. The cost will continue to come down. But the other question is, do you qualify for the tax credit? If you don't, then leasing might be the better option because it'll come off the price of the car for you.
So our next question is, would you recommend an EV if you don't own a home and don't have a charger at home?
Great question. Some people are draping extension cords out the window. I don't know that that's a really good plan, but some people are resorting to that. If you have access in your neighborhood to a level 2 charging station that you could plug in every couple of days at night or every 3 days at night and leave it overnight, that might be a good option. I know here in Newton, we have charging stations newly installed at the library and a number of city facilities, and more of them are coming into play. So something like that might be possible. I would not recommend relying solely on level 3 DC fast chargers on the highway for the reasons we already explained. So that is something to think about, but it's a recognized issue. New developers are planning to install new charging stations into their garages. And to retrofit them, you can certainly request that the building management retrofit charging stations, or at least give you access to at least a 110 volt plug in your apartment garage for sure. And yeah, I recommend it.
Mm-hmm. I would say that also we have a charging station right across the library, so come on by. I have a question about repair. So is it more costly to repair an EV than a gas-powered car? And do you have to generally go to a dealer to have them repaired? Do regular, like just regular gas stations and stuff, do they have the capability of repairing EVs?
Well, I don't think we're thinking about it correctly. The parts that break on the EV are the same undercarriage, steering, and tires that break on a normal car. And those will break if you go over potholes. Those will wear out with mileage and you have to replace them, just like on a normal car. However, there are no gears, no transmission to take care of. There's no oil to change. The brakes don't wear out anywhere near as fast because you don't use them. You're using regenerative energy to put it back into the battery, and that slows you down. In terms of the battery, they are generally lasting the life of the car, of course, I mentioned that 20% degradation over time. So instead of 250 miles, maybe your car after 8 or 10 years is only going to go 200 miles. Okay. So there is much, in my experience, and from what I read, there is much lower repair costs for electric vehicles. But the standard stuff you still got to take care of.
Right. I'm not seeing any more questions. If you have any, just remember, put them in the chat or raise your hand. Because I'm so curious about this. Somebody had said that they were going to get an Electra. Is that a newish type car? We were talking about Aptera.
An Aptera. Mm-hmm. Yeah, some really unusual designs of some very, very lightweight cars to try and maximize the range. And the Aptera is an unusual 3-wheel design. So I don't know that that's for everybody. They're going to, I believe, certify them for use on public roads, I believe. But yeah, it's not your run-of-the-mill normal vehicle if you're after something a little more exotic, for sure. Well, and I would like to mention, if you'd like to see a lot of the electric vehicles that are out there and some of the newer ones as well, by all means, join us in Newton at City Hall on Sunday afternoon, April 24th for our Earth Day weekend. We're having an electric vehicle expo, and we're bringing a lot of the newer vehicles and some of their owners who can describe their experiences and talk to you about the cars. No test drives, but can certainly look into them and kick the tires. And I would certainly recommend everybody visit a dealer or visit a friend down the block and take a test drive in some of these vehicles. And I think you will see the light very quickly.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to take this one last question. It seems like all the electric cars are very expensive. Are there some more affordable options available coming? They seem to be luxury cars like the Teslas.
Well, the Teslas certainly are sporty. I don't know if they're exactly luxury. You might want to go to the Mercedes or the Lucid for that, but they certainly are sporty cars. There are a large number of electric vehicles looking like kind of mini SUVs that are listing in the $38,000 to $40,000 range before the $7,500 tax credit and the $2,500 Massachusetts rebate, which will bring it to a more competitive $30,000 or $28,000. Not bad. If you'd like something a little less, the least expensive car in the market is the current version of the car I drive, the Nissan Leaf. A little bit dated design, but it's a very capable car, and that lists, I believe, for $27,000 before the 7.5 and then 2.5. So it comes down to, I don't know, $17,000, $18,000 to purchase, which I would say is pretty competitive. And then you never buy gas again.
Very true. So I made a mistake. That wasn't the last question. I see Jeannie has her hand up. Jeannie, go ahead and unmute.
Okay, I'm not sure if what the years are, but it seems like it was 25 or 30 years ago that California was really pushing for electric vehicles, and a lot of people bought them, and then they ended up having to junk them. And I remember seeing a documentary, in fact, it might have been at the Ashland Library, that there were dumps where they just kept piling up the cars, and they wouldn't let the people keep the cars. What's the background of that particular movement? And wouldn't that have been wonderful if that had stayed? Because people in California, I know, were buying those cars. What do you know about that?
Yeah, I remember that documentary fondly. It's called "Who Killed the Electric Car?"
Okay.
It was made by a filmmaker who had one of those electric cars and was extremely disappointed to have to give it back to the manufacturer to be crushed. Yeah. And they were set about trying to find out, why did this happen and who's responsible? Was it the car companies? Was it the oil companies? Was it the government regulation? Was it consumers didn't like them? What was the reason? And the net result, the blame fell a bit to everybody, and for not promoting it sufficiently, for not keeping the regulations in place, for not seeing the reasons to buy them, and for trying to block them because they would disrupt some of the energy companies' business. It didn't fit their business model if you plug in at home versus having to drive to somebody's station to fill up. So for all of those reasons, that initial movement of electric vehicles didn't succeed. It was forced by federal and California regulation at the time. And when those regulations were postponed or diluted, the companies actually didn't sell the cars. They actually leased the cars, and they didn't want to support them. And they didn't fit the business model of the oil companies. They were recalled and crushed or dumped. Not because people didn't love the cars, but because of all those other factors I mentioned. So go out and look at who killed the electric car. And then once the movement started again, for a lot of reasons, the filmmaker made another movie called Revenge of the Electric Car.
And how many years ago was that? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was up until... It was around 1997, 1998 that GM had their EV1 vehicle. Okay. And I remember fondly, there were a couple of those here being demonstrated and leased to the city of Newton. So I got to see those and walk by those in the afternoon and wished I could have an electric vehicle myself. And eventually I was fortunate enough to get one in 2013 when the Nissan Leaf became the first mass market electric car, and my regular vehicle gave out and it was time to replace it. So remember, if your regular vehicle is still going strong, don't dump it to get a more efficient vehicle, but rather the next time you're ready to change, get an electric car, please, for many, many reasons, for environmental reasons, for lower maintenance and lower energy cost reasons, for pleasure to drive reasons, for all the right reasons. Please go out and get yourself an electric car, but climb on the bicycle if you can, and do your errands on the bicycle and enjoy and get the exercise as well first. But if you have to have a car, get an electric car, please.
I think there's a lot of people here that are actually planning on it. So that is, now we know so much more. So thank you, George. This has been really enlightening. And I myself am going to be in the market for a new car next year. And I really hope, we are looking at electric cars. So I appreciate you taking the time and educating us on this really important topic.
Sure. Well, you'll have even more choices by next year, and the prices will continue to moderate as the technology improves. Mm-hmm. But the choices and the costs and the technology, in my opinion, are already good enough for the vast majority of people. Not everybody needs to drive 200 miles in a day.
No, especially now after going remote.
Encourage your employer to put in charging stations at work. And again, you go to work, you park your car, plug it in, it's ready by lunchtime. There's no problem at all. Plug your car in overnight, it's done before the morning. Mm-hmm. And there you go. You don't have to, you can drive past the gas stations. There is one repercussion I should mention. I no longer visit the gas stations. So if I want to pump up my tires at home, I use my bicycle pump because I'm no longer visiting the gas station. But that's not bad.
Not bad at all. And you can always go there just for the nostalgia of it.
Yeah, go say hi to your friend, the mechanic. Yes.
That's right. So again, thank you everybody for being here. I will send out a recap with all the resources, the video link of this presentation, and whatever else resources George had shared with us. So have a wonderful night, George. Thank you so much, and go out and get the electric. We know you can do it.
Thank you, Mina.
Yep. Have a good night, everybody.
Have a good night. Take care.